Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The fight for the working class voter is underway. Republicans and Democrats would both like to court this demographic group, but according to recent results from 2020, they accounted for about 60% of voters, and their income varies widely. So how do you go after, ultimately, a pretty diverse group and a majority of the voters in this country? That's the question that we're going to endeavor today. The GOP's blue-collar agenda is still a work in progress, according to a recent article from the Wall Street Journal, but they have some ideas. So let us look at those ideas and let us talk about why the Republicans may be trying to brand themselves as the party of the working class. We're also going to look at, though, what we've lost in rejecting Sundays or the Sabbath. Why has this gone by the wayside, and can it really be something that's detrimental to our society? Well, it might just be that. But we couldn't begin this critical conversation on the working class, the GOP, and the rejection of the Sabbath without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Yep, the political parties are trying to inveigle us. That's it, folks. The word of the day, inveigle. I-N-V-E-I-G-L-E. Used as a verb, means to persuade someone to do something by means of deception or flattery. So both political parties are going after the hardworking middle class, lower middle class. And are they telling us the truth? Are they inveigling us? And we sold everybody a bill of goods. We need to make the Sabbath just like every other day. Is that true? Have we been inveigled about that? Should there be something? Is there something to the fact that mankind, humans, need a day of rest?
It sounds like there could be a lot of inveigling going on.
Well, that's for the listeners to decide that if the people in charge are doing that, or if they're honest and open like we are here at True Chat.
Did somebody inveigle you to get your reading glasses hidden?
No.
Are you sure? Because if you were inveigled, you might not know it, right?
Yeah, I think they were lies and deceptions to myself.
Okay.
I think just old man brain, I had them and they're not here. So I don't know where they disappeared to.
And you've checked the top of your head recently?
I did.
Okay.
I have learned. It's kind of like rebooting the computer. When it doesn't work, you turn it off and turn it on. If I don't have glasses, I just reach on top of my head.
So of that 60%, right, that are working class, and what do we mean working class? Well, and just so you know, folks, we didn't come up with this definition. This is the definition that a Wall Street Journal NBC News poll used. And basically, they looked at anybody without a 4-year college degree, right? So you could have an associate's, or maybe you went to college and dropped out, or maybe you never went to any kind of education beyond high school, or maybe you didn't finish high school. And that's part of why the caveat there is the income varies widely, right? Because obviously the cook at McDonald's is probably not making the same as the person working in a high-tech factory who's in charge of writing the program, for the machine.
Either way, you might be able to buy a dilly bar if you were.
That's correct. Either one of them may have equal appetite for it. But about half of that 60% considered themselves Republicans, so about 50%, which is up from 37% a decade earlier and well above the 29% who identified last year as Democrats. So this is really interesting, though, because Joe Biden won the presidency and the popular vote, right? And yet almost half of the 60% of working class voters are people who consider themselves Republicans. So either, right, he got none of those and he got all of the 30% who identified as Democrats plus some portion of the group in there that's not identifying as either political party, the 20% or so. Or some of those people actually voted for him, which is odd considering that this whole article is about the GOP shifting to a blue collar agenda.
Well, we've talked about that on this show, the mystification of why the Democrats are losing the working class, because it has been the party of the working class for decades. And what this article, the reason it caught our attention was because it shows that the Democrats are losing the working class. But President Biden, with many of his agendas, one of his last ones, he came out and said, these jobs are going to be blue collar jobs. 90% of these jobs are blue collar jobs in our latest jobs program, building EV power stations. So this is a group of people, a group of voters that both sides want. The Democrats have had them for years and seem to be in the midst of losing them. And the Republicans seem to be picking them up just out of nowhere. Is it the Donald Trump phenomenon, or is it because the GOP is on that side of the hot issues for those people who do not have a college education? That seems to be the discussion that needs to be had. But either way, both sides are going to spend the next 2 or 3 years working this group, trying to get them to give them their support.
Are they turning away from the Democratic Party, or has the Democratic Party turned away from them? Or has the Republican Party offered something new and enticing? And I think the real answer, right, is probably some combination of those items has occurred. One, they've turned away some from the Democratic Party because they feel the Democratic Party has turned away from them, right?
True. Yes.
A large percentage, the majority of the quote unquote working class is white. Okay. I mean, that's just hard facts here, people. That's just the reality. And remember that the largest race group in the United States is in fact white still. So that continues to decline, obviously, as there are more people that are, are multiple races. And as immigration continues, obviously, all of that continues to change and flux. But the reality is the largest single race group by a very healthy margin, I mean, way out in front of the next closest, is definitely white. And so the why is that relevant? Well, that's the second point there, right? Which is this idea that the Democrats have turned away from them. They feel that because they hear, right, that the Democrats, they're about climate change, and, we can discuss that on its own, but a lot of what they hear about from Democrats, is some form of racial, right, equity or gender equity. Now, the gender equity thing aside, because we know that over half the people in the country are female, so, we can talk about that separately, but just the race component, they hear a lot about this. And the reality is, for most of them, they don't feel, they may have, again, we've talked about this, they may not have an issue with, addressing race issues, but that's what they feel like they hear a lot of coming from the Democratic Party, is that that's one of the primary concerns. And so what are you doing for me? Because it sounds like you're a lot more concerned about all these other people than you are about me. Maybe I'm misrepresenting that, but I think that is part of, I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying that I think that is a substantial part of that there's 3 prongs, and the 2 of the prongs are feeling like the Democratic Party has turned away from them, and subsequently the Democratic Party having turned away from them in being less concerned with also rural voters who, again, happen to be working class and happen to be white. And so you have several things, I think, that compound there, an odd, collision of events where Democrats don't like to talk about rural voters very often and don't have a lot of rural voters that they represent holistically, and subsequently are talking about issues that also don't feel like they connect with those voters.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's that piece of there's still a very large chunk of the voting population, and rightfully so, we've been very concerned about race relations and gender relations in the country. But when you do that, and it needs to be done, and we need to continue those conversations, and we need to continue, righting those wrongs and making our society better. But when you concentrate on that, then people are like, well, we've talked about it before. This is a competition, right? When you talk about politics. Well, I'm working really hard for everybody else, but what am I going to get out of this? And, you get a better America. You get a nicer place to live. You get the fact that we care about each other more, and that but those are all so feel good. It doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't, make my child's life better. I mean, and particularly when you have a group like the Republicans who come in and say, well, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And this is just all for this group of people who are hardworking, and code word, white. And Donald Trump was huge with that, right? I mean, race division was his number one playing card in getting votes. And that's just where I see this coming from. And it's smart on the parts of the Republicans. And now the Democrats need to double down, because this is an important voting bloc.
We'll talk about some of the ideas that Republicans have had to court the working class, and also look at what could the Democrats do to counter it. Are they trying to counter it? And if so, is what they're doing effective? More to talk about. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
If you haven't been to the United States Census Bureau's website, I'd highly recommend it, because it is a good source of visualization and also just general data. One of the items that I have pulled up here for Lance to take a look at is a map of the United States, and it is
I recognize it, believe it or not. I actually had
that's good.
I actually had geography in school.
Okay.
We don't teach it anymore.
That's right.
But, it's not important.
Yes.
But yes, I actually had geography, so I recognize the United States.
If you haven't seen those videos, I'd have to pull a couple up for you. They have these YouTube videos where people go out and they set up a map just in a public place, and they'll ask people to point to different countries on the globe, and just name any countries that you can name. You point to them and you name them, and you'd be amazed at how many Americans can't identify the United States of America on a world map.
Much less, I thought you were going to go with the ones where they have a map of the United States.
No.
And they ask people to pick their state and any other states they know.
That's a mess.
And people can't do that.
Anyway, this map that I've pulled up that Lance is looking at, the darker the area, the whiter it is. The lighter the area, the less white it is. And what this map ever so clearly demonstrates is that if you overlay this with political leanings, you will find that the darkest areas are almost certainly red. The middle of the road colors, and to give you some examples of what those might be, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Florida is a little lighter, actually, than Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Illinois, Oklahoma, Nevada. Those are some of those mid-colored states, but your consistently liberal ones like California, New York, Virginia. I guess it could be debated if North Carolina is consistently that way or not. But even along the East Coast, you look, and it's amazing that those states are also less white. And I think this speaks to a couple things. One is it as simple as race? No. At the same time, does race tell us that part of what's happening is race is becoming more party specific? Yes. Obviously, there's lots of white Democrats. There has to be, because you couldn't win a presidential election without them. At the same time, these states that are more likely to vote Democratic have a more diverse population, which would also stand to reason that if you're white in those states, it's more likely that you work with somebody who is not white, right? And that you may even be friends with, married to, have people in your family. All of those things are more likely. Where if we take a state like Wyoming, which is one of the darkest, that's probably not terribly likely. And it's not perfectly that simple, because when we look at the map and when we see things like Maine, right, they're almost completely white, and they're almost always blue. So there are obviously exceptions. Oregon is another good example of one that is by far mostly white. And of course, it dominated the news cycle for much of the last year as being a place of contention. So it's not a perfect hard and fast rule, but I think it speaks to part of what Lance was talking about in the first segment of seeing how and where, right, they're playing on this. And it's also interesting how that coincides with our urban and rural divide, right? Many of these states that are darker in color are also more rural. And those are places that no political candidates spend a lot of time, but it's almost unheard of for a Democrat to campaign in Wyoming.
The important thing here is that
right?
We're having the conversation, because so many people don't want to talk about that this is occurring. And I think that's the important thing to understand. Okay, let's have the conversation. Let's talk about it. And then where do we go from here? I mean, it's obvious when you overlay the voting with the population that that's part of what's going on. And, if you run from the conversation, then we never really figure out what's going on. And that's what we're doing. And you need to tell us what you think. I mean, are we way off base, or we're like, well, you guys, cancel culture, we're going to woke all over you and
I'm not sure that's how that works.
I know, but because, you don't know what you're doing, but, you tell us, send us an email at podcast@thestateofus.org. Tell us how you think about this. I mean, do you agree with me? And that is, we need to be able to talk about this. It's like, oh, you're talking about black and white. I can't be friends with you because you're going to bring this up. Well, but it's happening. And if we don't understand the other side, then we never have the conversation. And if we don't have the conversation, then we don't find out the things we have in common, and we can't move forward. And I guess that's where I am. I mean, you can bring up all of this and you need to, because the audience, maybe everybody doesn't understand this, but the part of this that upsets me, that frustrates me, is that people say, well, you can't talk about this stuff. You're going to lose listeners. You're going to do this because you're not going to, so no matter what you say, half the people that listen to you are going to be mad at you. And it's like, but folks, that's the reason to have the conversation. If you can't have the conversation about it, then we never fix the issue. And this issue is that we have one segment of our society who thinks they've been left out for a long, long time. And then you have the other segment of our society who says, well, if we only talk about that group that's left out, then I'm getting left out. And therein lies the problem. And instead of just fixing the problem and saying we're all going to get better together, and whatever helps one group is going to help the other group because it's going to help all of us, we divide and go into our camps and don't even listen to the other side and just not even have a conversation about it. And that's why I think this is important today, is that this is a group of people of these working class people that both groups are going to have to go after. And even the GOP has seen rise in Hispanic votes in the 2020 election, and they've seen the rise in African-American votes, because the Democratic Party, while giving lip service, has not followed through, at least in the minds of those groups of people, enough to carry the votes. So you can't blame the Republicans. I'm sitting here smacking the Democrats on the wrist saying, you all are missing the point here. You're not just losing the white vote. You're losing the Hispanic vote. You're losing African-American vote to the point that you used to get it. I mean, what do you mean? African-Americans, the majority of them voted for Joe Biden. They did, but more voted for Donald Trump than normally vote for a Republican candidate, because the Republicans and Donald Trump made the selling point. Well, what have the Democrats really done for you? You've been voting Democrat for 20, 30 years, and where's it gotten you? How much better is your life, right? That's the age-old political question. Is your life better now than it was 4 years ago? And that's the conversation that the Democrats need to have is why, you won the election, but you lost all these, you didn't win a bunch of Senate seats that you probably should have. You almost lost the House of Representatives. And minorities who you claim as the progressive wing of your party, that's what you're working for. They're not voting for you as much as they used to. So what are you doing? What's your agenda? Who are you trying to help? And I say that, as a card-carrying liberal. It's like...
Well, it's the same old thing, right? The strategy for the Democrats is lacking.
I'm scared when the Republicans are like, yeah, we're coming after the working class voter. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, if they get this, then their agenda is going to be out there. If they find a way to get this, if they find a way to pull 10% of the working class voter, 10% more of the working class voter, you can forget all the ideas that those of us who think like the friendly redneck liberal think we need to move to help the country. And that's the scary part.
I think the Democrats have done a bad job of balancing the agenda, right? And what I mean by that is, can we all agree?
Umbrella? Where's Barack Obama's umbrella of bringing everybody in out of the rain?
Gone. Because wokeness has taken the place of it.
That was only 5 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
8 years ago.
And the problem is there's a lot of people in parts of the country, like where Lance and I are, that they really don't. And here's this whole, right? It's unfortunate. Race should not be something that's claimed by a party, right? It just shouldn't be. It should be something that all parties are on the page of addressing and doing something.
Yeah, it should be about the issues, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't matter that who you're married to or whether you're single or what the color of your skin is. It should be who's making America a better place to live for all of us, right? But all of us.
Right. But unfortunately, it hasn't been that. It's been the Republicans have seen an opportunity to not blatantly do things that are against the Democrats, as some people would call woke agenda of telling everybody why they're wrong and telling them how evil they are. And it's not to say that there aren't valid points there. Okay. We can do a separate show and discuss the many valid points of how our country is far from where it needs to be on race. And I think Lance and I are both on the page of we need to do a hell of a lot more. At the same time, that can't be the central tenet of a mainstream political party's agenda. Because the problem is that what it becomes is then we're not talking about, we can talk about that if we're also going to talk about what are we going to do to fix the growing issues for the working class. If you live in large cities, the issue is you're getting priced out of your housing, right? And if you live in rural areas, there's a lack of opportunity. And there's no discussion. You don't hear any discussion from the Democrats about those issues or a little dab of lip service every now and then. So why would you expect that you can hold on to this large portion of the population? Now, there's plenty of Democrats that would chalk it up to, well, they're a bunch of racists. We don't want them anyway. And at the same time, saying that very thing is the thing that further alienates them. And do the Republicans have a great solution? No. Part of what we said is we'll review a few of the examples. Their solutions aren't great, and they don't really even have a unified platform on it. But part of their sales pitch is, like Lance said, what have you gotten as being a member of the Democratic Party? Nothing, They don't even talk about you anymore.
So vote for us, and we're not going to give you anything either. But hey, you try something new.
But we'll acknowledge you and pretend like we care about you. But when you're faced with somebody who doesn't talk about you at all or somebody who talks about you, I guess, you prefer the folks that talk about you. Because at least you're under the impression that you're on their minds. And for some of you are, in fairness, A senator proposed a blue-collar bonus, a taxpayer-funded subsidy intended to move low-income workers closer to a benchmark median hourly wage set at $16.50 and indexed to inflation. Another senator has proposed a parental leave plan funded by the parent's future Social Security benefits, as well as a plan to end the preferential tax treatment for stock buybacks intended to encourage companies to invest instead in expanding their operations, potentially benefiting workers. And another senator would refashion a set of safety net programs and tax breaks into a monthly cash benefit for families with children through age 17, starting with mothers that are pregnant. Now, that may all sound like, well, clearly these are Democratic senators, right? Nope. All of those, every single one of them is a Republican senator, and their names you'd recognize: Senator Mitt Romney, Senator Marco Rubio, and Senator Josh Hawley. All of them.
Josh Hawley.
Excuse me.
Missouri, yeah.
All of them. Sorry. Yes. Don't tread on Missouri. I didn't want to forget them. But all of them, right, are Republicans, and they're the ones that are proposing these ideas. So there is clearly not just, now they haven't gotten this done yet, so I guess it is still just lip service, but they're actually starting to talk about some real policy things. And the leader of a 154-member caucus in the House of Representatives has suggested to the leadership that we be the party of the working class. So I think it's safe to say the Republicans are getting more serious about it. The question is, will the Democrats rise to meet the challenge and say, here's what we can do? Well,
oh, wait a minute. Why can't they just work together and come up with a law that helps everybody?
Well, that's because we become really divided, right? And that in part might be, Lance, because we've rejected the idea of a day of rest. Right?
I'm voting for that one.
So what do we mean by that? Could getting rid of Sundays as a day of rest, or whatever your Sabbath might have been, really be the issue? Because most Americans are moving away from that. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Well, an author who wrote a Saturday essay for the Wall Street Journal disagrees. Why might the Sabbath be the answer to some bipartisanship and lower divorce rates and lower drug use? Let's find out. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Race, ethnic, social, all the many things that we've become divided on, political affiliation, right? Could they just all be fixed if we had a little more time to spend with each other? I don't know. This is the article that the friendly redneck liberal marked for us, right? Because here's the interesting thing, right, from the piece. Who would really complain? The share of Americans who don't identify with any religion continues to grow, and even many believers reject the concept of the Sabbath as a divinely ordained day of rest. Instead, we are encouraged to pursue lives of constant action and purpose, and we do. Smart devices allow white-collar professionals to freely mingle, work, and play. The gig economy and the COVID-19 work-from-home trend have further blurred the line between the two, and the Sabbath doesn't fit into the rhythm of our lives. It feels like an imposition. It is an imposition. The article is long and lengthy, but that was the first bit, and I think this next part is the other part that Lance and I felt was important to share. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all appreciated the bond between Sabbath restrictions and human freedom, even as they designated different days to be holy. Across the West today, however, the drive toward maximal market liberty has squeezed out the liberty of the Sabbath. We have banished it in the name of, quote, choice. And some choice we have. Working class families are denied even half a day of rest together, yet we're puzzled by the astronomical divorce rates, abysmal low rates of family formation, alienation, and drug abuse. We have cashiered the Sabbath for algorithmic human resources, scheduled computer code designed to minimize labor costs, regardless of the impact on families and communities.
I touched on this topic a few episodes ago, and that is, and I did so because it's not just something that, as a boomer, I remember Sunday being set aside for family and the grocery store not being open and the drugstore not being open. I mean, I can remember when, my grandma said, well, you shouldn't go to the movies on Sunday, or the movie theater didn't open until Sunday night. And it was a slower pace. And you can say, well, that's what the problem was. No, but and I'm not saying this is the perfect panacea for all problems. But I've got millennial children and I work with a millennial. And all I hear from millennials in my circle is, well, we don't want to work like you had to work. We don't want to do that. Okay, then let's set aside some time where you can't be required to do it. Give it a forced time off. And you know what? Before, and go ahead, tell me what you think, podcast@thestateofus.org, send us that email. But before you send and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, old man. We survive, people, okay? And that's part of the whole thing with race relations. Everybody says, oh, it's so horrible now. Okay, I agree with Justin. He's right. We all agree. We both agree that more needs to be done. But it's so much better now than it was. I understand in your 25 years that you've been alive, you maybe haven't seen a lot of changes. But things are better, okay, than they were in 1917. Women have the right to vote now, okay? Things are better. African Americans are represented in greater numbers across the board in different areas, okay? Is it as good as it should be? No, but it is better, okay? So I just get tired and I get frustrated, and it's probably because I'm getting old, of people just saying, well, we just got to keep going, keep pushing. And I look around and I'm like, well, nobody stays in a relationship anymore. Children are raising themselves. Drug abuse is rampant. Nobody's happy. Everybody's getting counseling.
Now, wait a second.
And it's like, wait a minute. I'm just doing what the younger generation does.
But doesn't the boomer tell us that we just need to work harder in order to get ahead? We're not working hard enough. That's it. We're too lazy.
Maybe if you took some time to relax, you could then work harder and be more productive than the other times. Sorry, you can't work a 6-hour day and make what you do if I'm working 10. And that's what the millennials want.
Is that what the millennials want?
Yeah, that's what they want.
Okay.
Send your emails. No,
I don't know about
that. we talk to them all the time, right? They want.
But see, that's I think what we were talking about earlier in the show of stereotypes exist for a reason, right? We've all talked about that.
And we know our Gen Z people are scared to death of everything. We did the show.
Yes.
We did the article that shows that as a group of people, the group younger than the millennials, well, they're just scared to do anything because they're just going to be total outcasts because that's just what everybody's doing now. So how does that make you productive? Because anything you do, you're afraid that people are going to say, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. And you're going to be friendless and jobless and everything else because nobody wants you. I mean, come on, people. Is this really the kind of life you want? Oh, wait a minute. So now millennials are choosing not to have children. Why? Because the world that they would bring children into is not one that they think is worthy of bringing children into this world. Well, then obviously we need to fix something. We have to start somewhere because we need the birth rate to fill the jobs. Wait a minute. We just read an article where nobody wants to be a teacher. And the people that are in teaching want to get out because it's not the job for, whoa, so who's going to teach our children? I mean, there's all these signs, and all we're saying is give rest a chance, to steal from a 60s anti-war song. All we are saying is give peace a chance. All I'm saying is give rest a chance. What do you have to lose to set aside a day and say, I'm going to give it to myself and to my family, especially coming out of the pandemic when we had to spend that time. And so many people have written articles about how they really connected with their family and with their children. And it was fun to cook meals and sit down and eat dinner. Let's not lose this and get back into the rat race. That's all I'm saying. I think it's very time sensitive here. As we start to get back to that air quote normal thing, okay, which I'm not sure ever exists, let's not lose all the positives we had when we took the time to be together.
Well, I think we've talked about there is some positive news there, obviously, and that people are looking at that and they are thinking about, what do we want work to look like when we return? And there's been all kinds of discussions about, the possibility of a longer weekend by condensing the hours that you work into fewer days.
Working 410s.
Right. I mean, all kinds of different ideas. So you're not actually working less, but when you're working is more grouped together to actually give you quote unquote more time off. But there's a lot of problems that go into this, right, that are larger, that are societal. And that's why I struggle with do I think people should set aside that day? Sure. Do I know that there's a lot of people out there who don't feel like they have that choice? Sure. And I think that that's part of what we have to acknowledge as a society is, as we've talked about, there's a core set of issues that need address. And they surround things like the rural-urban divide, which we talked about some in the first segment, the reality of, parties trying to claim racial groups, that we haven't done enough, that we should do more. And not the least of which in all of that is how much do we pay folks, right? And what do we ask of them in return in taxes? And what do we do to unify around a common purpose? Not a lot anymore. Things like national service, right? So there's a lot of different ways that this could be addressed, that could be talked about. And I think one of them is, how do we get to a point where society believes that it's important that you have a day where you're disconnected from work?
But you say people feel like they can't afford it. Another way to ask the same question is, what are we losing because we're not?
Mm-hmm. And I agree, but you have to get to a point where, where people feel like, right, they can afford it. Because it's that same thing we always talk about. It can be whatever the data might be, but if people don't feel what the data tells us, it's hard to convince them to do it, no matter how hard you hit them upside the head with the stats. So I think it'd be good. And I'm sure it would start to address some of these issues with our partisanship if we had to spend a little bit more time with our fellow humans in non-work settings. But we want to know what you think. Send us an email podcast@thestateofus.org. And Lance, why are we having this conversation? Why did we have this conversation today?
Well, because here at True Chat, we have a mission on every show to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've tried to have that today when we talk about what both political parties are doing and when it comes to trying to win over the working class. And what should we do with the Sabbath? Is it something that we should renegotiate? Should we start to take it back? If you like today's show, or if you didn't, let people know about it. I mean, come on, get the conversation going. That's where we're going to make changes, folks. We got to make some changes. Tell them they can find a show on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and anywhere podcasts are found.
Listen to new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. Eastern Time. That's when The State of Us is released as a podcast, and you can hear us in select talk radio markets around the country, so check your local AM and FM station and see if they carry our program. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.